Om Namah Shivaya. This is Ravi from Shivananda Ashram. Today we will be continuing the talks, summarizing chapter-wise the Bhagavad Gita. Before we begin, please join me in the prayers. Om Gajananam Bhutganadi Sevitam Kapita Jambo Phalasara Bhakshitam Oma Sutam Shoka Vinashakaranam Namami Vigneshwara Pada Pankajam Shadananam Kumkumaraktavaranam Mahamitmatim Divyamayurvahanam Rudrasya Sonum Sursainanatham Guham Sadaham Sharanam Prapadye Ya Kundendu Tusharahara Dhavala Ya Shubhravastavruta Ya Veena Varadandamandita Ya Shveta Padmasana Ya Brahmaच्युत Shankara Prabhritibhi Devai Sada Pujita Samam Patu Saraswati Bhagavati Nishesha Jaryapaha Om Namah Shivaya Guruve Satchitananda Murtaye Nishprapanchaya Shantaya Shri Shivanandaya Te Namaha Shri Vishnudevanandaya Te Namaha Om Sarvamangala Mangalye Shive Sarvartha Sadike Sharanye Trambake Gauri Narayani Namostute Narayani Namostute Om Shanti 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 Om Tat Sat Om Namah Shivaya. So last week we saw an outline of the second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. And we saw that the chapter dealt with Karma Yoga and Jnana Yoga. While Krishna focused initially on Jnana Yoga, he again praises Karma Yoga in the middle. So he begins the chapter with Jnana Yoga. Then he asks Arjuna to do Karma. And then while ending the chapter, again he goes back to Jnana Yoga, giving a description of a Jnani. So there is Jnana Yoga, Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga. And Arjuna is thoroughly confused. What exactly is it that Krishna wants? And therefore he says, the first verse, he says, Jyayasi chet karmanaste mata buddhir janardana tatkim karmani ghore mam niyojayasi keshava. He says, hey Krishna, you have talked about both Jnana Yoga and Karma Yoga. But if Jnanam is better, why is it that you are asking me to do this kind of actions of killing and such terrible actions? Why do you want me to do? So Gore Mam Karmani, these terrible actions, why do you ask me to do? Third chapter begins with this. Now in this chapter, the first 7 verses is basically an introduction to the chapter, where Arjuna is asking Krishna which is better, Jnana Yoga or Karma Yoga. And to understand this, he asks for a comparison. And Krishna comes up with a reply in verse number 3, where he says, Lokesmin dvividha nishtha pura prokta maya naga jnana yogena sankhyanam karma yogena yoginam. So he says, in this world, I have long ago given 2 ways, 2 paths. One path is for the Karma Yogi and one path is for the Jnana Yogi. So we understand from this that there is no real choice between Karma and Jnana. Arjuna's question asking for an explanation on which one is better shows that he has not understood either Jnana, either knowledge or Karma or action. So it's like asking, should I wear the white pant? I can ask, should I wear the white pant or should I wear the grey pant? That is a valid question because one pant is a substitute for another pant. But I shouldn't be asking, should I wear a white pant or should I wear a grey shirt? No? Shirt and pant, they are not substitute for each other. I need to wear both. Similarly, karma is not a substitute for jnana. Action is no substitute for knowledge, and knowledge is no substitute for action. They are not alternative modes of liberation. Krishna makes it very clear in the Gita, the only way to liberate yourself, the only way to achieve liberation is knowledge only. Where is the question of a choice? So a person who is a mumukshu, the one who wants moksha, the one who is interested in liberation, he has no choice but to follow the path of Jnana Yoga. But the catch here is that if you want to follow the path of Jnana Yoga and you want that Jnana Yoga should transform you, because Jnana Yoga should take away your ignorance and convert you into a Jnani, then it is necessary for a certain amount of qualification to be there. Your mind needs a certain amount of purity, a certain amount of maturity, and a certain amount of detachment. And these qualifications have to be acquired only through Karma Yoga. So it is like saying, do you want to do your master's degree or do you want to do your graduate degree, bachelor's degree? They are not substitutes. You have to do your bachelor's degree and then only can you come to the master's degree. Similarly, one has to acquire the qualifications, and those qualifications can be acquired only through Karma Yoga. Once the required level of maturity is there through your Karma Yoga activity, then and then only can you come to Jnanam, and that will work on you. Therefore, the scriptures say, follow Karma Yoga, acquire the minimum qualification called Chitta Shuddhi, purity of mind, stability of mind. Once you have acquired the qualifications, then follow Jnana Yoga and acquire moksha. So Jnana Yoga has a particular result. Karma Yoga has a particular result. What is the result of Karma Yoga? It is being prepared with a mature mind. It is being prepared with a mind which is free from too many disturbances. That is the end result of Karma Yoga. What is the end result of Jnana Yoga? The end result of Jnana Yoga is liberation or moksha. And therefore scriptures say, first follow Karma Yoga, get the necessary qualifications in terms of a certain amount of maturity of the mind, and then come to Jnana Yoga, acquire knowledge, and then only can you be liberated. So if you look at it from that point of view, Karma Yoga encompasses every sadhana, every discipline, every spiritual discipline excepting Jnana Yoga is covered by the word Karma Yoga. So you can do japa, you can do asana practice, you can do Ashtanga Yoga, you can do meditation, you can do bhajans, you can do bhakti, you can do Raja Yoga. Whichever you do, whichever sadhana you do, whichever discipline you follow, ultimately you are going to get only the qualification, the Chitta Shuddhi as we call it, the maturity of mind required for Jnana Yoga. Once you have the maturity of mind, then and then only Jnana Yoga will work on you. Right. That is one part of what Krishna conveys. And then there is an implicit question in Arjuna's words. Should I become a sannyasi or not? Because he doesn't want to fight. So he says, should I not become a sannyasi? After all, sannyas is the acknowledged way of getting to jnana, getting to knowledge. Now, there is a choice about the lifestyle. There is no choice about the sadhana, about the discipline to be followed. So, as I explained, the discipline to be followed is twofold. Karma yoga, get maturity of mind. Jnana yoga, get moksha. Then why does Arjuna then ask, should I become a sannyasi or not? So there is another concept. Should I become a sannyasi to follow Jnana yoga, or can I follow Jnana yoga sitting in my normal life as a householder? A very important part of the scripture which says, yes, these are not sadhana, these are not disciplines. The sannyasi lifestyle, it's a lifestyle. The householder, it's a lifestyle. So they are not disciplines. And yes, there is a choice about the lifestyle which the spiritual seeker can follow. He can either follow what we call pravritti marga, a life in society with family responsibilities, also called grahastha ashram. So he is part of society, he contributes, and together with that he follows the sadhana. Or if he has a mind which is sufficiently prepared, he can become a sannyasi, nivritti marga. He can take to a life of renunciation where there is no responsibility excepting to focus on the study of the scriptures. So sannyasa ashrama. Now the point is, in both these ashramas, whether you are in grahastha ashrama, whether you are a householder, or whether you are a sannyasi, you need to follow both the disciplines. The grahastha ashrama person, the householder, has to follow karma yoga and jnana yoga to come to moksha. The sannyasi also has to follow karma yoga and jnana yoga to come to moksha. So Krishna tells Arjuna that between the two ashramas, the householder is better. So this statement is often misinterpreted by people to mean that it is better to be a householder than to be a sannyasi for the purpose of acquiring knowledge, for the purpose of moksha. You must remember that a doctor gives medicines based on the individual. There is no general medicine. So you look at the individual and then prescribe the medicine. Similarly, Krishna is prescribing the sadhana based on who is in front of him. Who is in front of him? Arjuna. Is Arjuna ready for sannyasa? So to be ready for sannyasa, we said your mind needs to be fairly free of fluctuations. You need to have controlled mind. You need to have worked upon your likes and dislikes and have a certain degree, a certain modicum of control over your likes and dislikes. Does Arjuna have that? No. So for the moment, Krishna knows that the sannyasi lifestyle is not for Arjuna because he doesn't have the required maturity of mind. And so he says, no Arjuna, between the two, householders are better. We have to understand householder lifestyle is better for you Arjuna at the moment. That's what Krishna is saying. And on the whole, this advice can be true for all of us in this world because Krishna addresses Arjuna in the Gita, but Krishna is addressing all of us seekers. And for the majority of us, we are not free of likes and dislikes. We all have our likes and dislikes. We all need things. And therefore, this advice which Krishna gives is aimed directly at us also. And he is telling us, for all of you guys, the householder life is better because you need to work on karma. And Krishna gives himself as an example of a grahastha. He is a grahastha, right? So he himself is a grahastha. So he tells Arjuna, I am also a grahastha. Look at me, look at yourself also. You are a grahastha. You have not been able to master your likes and dislikes as yet. It's not by way of a criticism, but by way of a statement of fact. This is what you are, and therefore you need to work on karma yoga. Then you have the next section of 13 verses from verse number 8 to verse number 20, which is a discussion on what exactly is Karma Yoga. And the 8th verse beautifully puts it. Niyatam kuru karmatvam karmajayo hya karmanaha shariryatra pichate na prasiddhet akarmanaha. So he says, Niyatam kuru karmatvam. Hey Arjuna, you should do what are the nitya karma, what are those duties which arise to you by way of your position in life, that you should do. Because doing karma is always better than not doing any karma at all. And he says, indeed, sharir yatra api, the journey of your body. Now the body's journey is always from birth to death, from the womb to the tomb, as they call it, right? That is the journey of the body. And therefore he says, even that body, sharir yatra, na prasiddhet akarmana, is not possible without doing action. Now if we look at the definition of Karma Yoga arising from these verses, we can think of dividing the term Karma Yoga into two pieces. One is karma and one is yoga. So karma is proper action, yoga is proper attitude. What is proper action? Karma can be divided into three types of karma. Sattvika karma. So Sattvika karma is the highest form of action because it promotes your spiritual growth to the maximum level possible. And Sattvika action is defined as that action where the number of beneficiaries are large. It can very much include you as a beneficiary. It can very much include your own family as a beneficiary. But beyond that, the higher the number of beneficiaries of that action, the more Sattvika is the action. And scripture says that the more Sattvika the action, the faster the mind is purified. So that is Sattvika action. Then you've got Rajasika action. It is one step lower than Sattvika action. It promotes spiritual growth, but to a lower extent. And here we define Rajasika action as that action in which the beneficiaries are not too many. And sometimes it is only me and my immediate family. Other people do not benefit. So that is Rajasika action. Tamasika action is the poorest. In Tamasika action, I definitely benefit. But there is harm caused to others. So this is the difference between Tamasika and Rajasika. Rajasika also I benefit, Tamasika also I benefit. Rajasika, no harm is caused to anybody. Tamasika causes harm to others. And therefore Tamasika action does not promote spiritual growth at all, but there is a spiritual fall instead. This is the three types of actions where we talk about proper action. And proper action obviously here is only Sattvika action. And maybe to some extent Rajasika action, but largely Sattvika action. Then we said yoga meant proper attitude. So what is the attitude? Krishna defines as samatvam, maintaining equanimity of mind. So, which means that whatever circumstances I come across, adverse or favorable, my mind is not disturbed too much. The method for achieving this samatvam, this balance of mind, is given as twofold. First is dedicating all the actions to the Lord. So whatever action I do from the minute I get up, I dedicate it to the Lord as an offering to Him. How is this? In my role as a doer, in my role as a karta, I will each and every one of my actions, I will offer it to the Lord as an offering. So this is my attitude, that whatever I am doing it and I am giving it to the Lord. What is the advantage of that? Because I am offering it to the Lord, I will do whatever actions are necessary given my role in life, and I will not dislike any action. Because when I offer something to the Lord, I can't be offering something that I dislike, and therefore all actions will be uniformly like mine. And therefore the strain of doing something or being forced to do something which I do not like, that is avoided by this particular frame of mind, by this particular attitude, which we call Ishvara Arpana Buddhi, the attitude of offering all my actions as an arpanam, as an offering to the Lord. So Krishna is saying here that it is not necessary that you will always get to do actions which you like. And therefore, hey Arjuna, sometimes you will get actions which you do not want to do, which you dislike. And therefore, if you cannot get the actions which you like, learn to like whatever you have to do. If you cannot get to do what you like, one must learn to like whatever I get to do. And this liking is developed by dedicating this action to the Lord. So, to maintain samatvam, to maintain this equanimity of mind, I should get to like whatever I do. And if I don't, if I have choices here, some actions I like and some actions I don't like, what is the problem? My life is constantly moving from one resentment to another resentment. And there will be a perpetual frown on my face. I will never smile because the opportunities for smiling is far and few between. The number of actions which I normally get to do which I like are few and far in between. Most of them I don't like. And therefore he says, offer them to the Lord. With that offering, you will learn not to dislike any action. And therefore, you will move in life quite smoothly. Every action that you do in life is something which you like because you are offering it to the Lord. That is one part, the offering. Then there is the second part, which is receiving the fruits of my actions. So this is my role as Bhokta, as the receiver. The earlier was in my role as the doer, as the person who is doing the actions, and now I am receiving the fruits of those actions, which we call Bhokta. So Karta is always the Bhokta also. And in this role, every moment since I am acting in my life, I am also experiencing fruits of action every minute of my life. Not only the fruits of action of this life, of the past hour, of the past day, but also of the immediate past, maybe last year, maybe 10 years ago. And not only that, Shastra says that understanding is not complete until you know that the results which you experience today are also of a large number of previous lives also, the remote past. And the only way to be comfortable is to be able to accept all of this as Ishvara's gift based on the sum total of my actions. This is called Prasada Buddhi. And therefore karma I can look at in various ways. I can look at karma as the commandment of the Lord. I have to do because He says so, right? I can look at it as a yajna, as a ritual of worship, out of a sense of gratitude. I can look at karma as a shodakam, as a purifier. The more karma I do offering it to the Lord, the more nishkama karma I do, what happens is my mind becomes purified. And I can look at karma as dharma, as social harmony. So whichever aspect appeals to you, here Arjuna, he says, you follow that. Whichever way you follow, ultimately you will benefit. Then he tells Arjuna that, hey Arjuna, there is a certain cycle of life which needs to be followed. So he says, Annat bhavanti bhutani parjanyat anna sambhavaha yajnat bhavati parjanyaha yajna karma samudbhavaha. He says, all beings are born from food. And food is generated, is born because of rain. And rain comes out of rituals like yajna. And yajna is born out of what? Out of action. So Krishna is pointing out that yajna is born out of karma. And out of this yajna comes rain. Out of the rain, food is born. And out of this food only beings are born. He's pointing out that there is a natural order in this universe which I should appreciate. We are all integral parts of creation. Our life is connected, interconnected with fellow human beings. Our life is interconnected not only with fellow human beings, it's interconnected with animals, it's interconnected with plants, it's interconnected with the environment, with the forests, with the rivers, with the oceans. It's interconnected with the very seasons themselves. And therefore, when I look at nature, when I look at all other living beings, I will see what? That other living beings apart from human beings, they all live in a life of harmony. Plants do not create environmental disturbances. Animals do not create disharmony in the environment. Why? Because these plants, animals, fish, they are programmed to instinctively live a life of harmony. Only the human being has this unique power of free will. And he has been given an intelligence also. And since that intelligence is a very powerful one, he can use his free will to either create a heaven out of this wonderful creation, or he can use that free will to destroy the entire creation. It is only the human being who will destroy nature. And therefore it does not matter whether I am religious or I am a believer, I am an atheist or I am an agnostic. Krishna says, unless you accept the harmony of the creation, you have to accept. Unless you accept this particular cycle of creation, there is no way that you can live peacefully with nature. And he says, Evam pravartitam chakram nanu vartiya yaha, nanu vartiya tiya yaha, aghayurindra ramaha mogham partha sa jivati. He says that one who is unable to accept and understand this harmony has lived his life in vain. Why? Because he does not contribute to the growth of nature, nor to his own growth, nor to the growth of society. And he says, Mogham Partha Sa Jivati. His life has been wasted. It's a meaningless life. Then he moves on to Jnani. Who is a Jnani and what are the duties of a Jnani? So here he says that the Jnani has already achieved the purpose of his life. The scripture says that purpose of your life is to become a liberated person, is to get moksha. And the Jnani therefore does not need any more discipline, any more sadhana, because he has already achieved his objective. And therefore Jnani does not require karma yoga, jnana yoga. He requires nothing, because whatever the disciplines can give you, the end that the disciplines can give you, the Jnani has already achieved. But he says, as long as this Jnani is in society, he should follow all the disciplines, even though he does not need them anymore. He should serve as a role model. Why? Because if good role models do not exist, people need role models in any case. And if there are no good role models, then you will find that undesirable role models will come into the picture. So he says the Jnani, as long as he is in society, should ensure that he follows all the disciplines to serve as a role model. Otherwise, other people will look at him and say, oh, he's a Jnani, he doesn't need this, so maybe I should imitate him. Not understanding that he has already finished what is required to be obtained by that discipline. And then he says, okay, Arjuna, also do not confuse people who are not ready. So this is not to be viewed as from the Jnani's point alone, but also all elderly people, especially Mata, Pita, that is father, mother, guru, king. All these people need to function as role models and good role models, otherwise youngsters will go astray. Then we have 5 very important verses, verse 30 to 35, where the entire teaching of the third chapter is condensed. In fact, the entire teaching of the Karma Kanda is condensed here. And in these 5 verses, the 30th chapter is the 30th verse is the most important verse, where Krishna condenses the entire Karma Yoga. So he says, Mai sarvani karmani sanyas yadyatma chetasa nirashira nirmamo bhutva yudhyasva vigatatsvaraha. So it's a 5-point program for becoming a Karma Yogi. What is it? He says, number 1, you should have a primary goal in your life. And what is that goal? That goal should be liberation or moksha. So we can call it the spiritual goal. The spiritual goal is the primary goal of your life. You may have other goals. All of us have other goals. But he says, examine those goals, analyze them. Are they supportive to your main goal? If your main goal is moksha, spiritual goal is your primary goal, then you should have only those goals as other supporting goals which are subservient to this main goal. They should ensure that they all lead to the primary goal. Because if any of your subservient goals, these other goals, if they are goals which take you away from the teaching, which take you away from the spiritual path, then these are useless, because they are not supporting your main goal. And therefore the first thing, have a spiritual goal as primary goal, examine all your other goals, ensure that they are all such which will support you in your main path. That's one. Then we said, have this attitude of dedicating all your actions to the Lord. So, Ishvara Arpana Buddhi. What is the main advantage? When I dedicate all my actions to the Lord, I learn to like whatever I am doing. I get away from the mental attitude of I should do only what I like. And I begin to say, whatever I like, I am doing, or whatever I am doing, I will like, because I am offering that action to the Lord as a worship. As a ritualistic worship, I am offering it to the Lord, and therefore I will definitely like whatever I am doing. And this is what we call work is worship. So convert all your work into worship. That's number 2. Number 3, Nirashira, he says. Be prepared for all types of situations. Because what tomorrow will bring, what is the result of any particular action is not in my control. That is not to say that everything is predetermined, but it says that yes, you are definitely instrumental in determining your future, but wisdom lies in understanding that I alone do not determine my future. If I say that there is no other factor which determines my future excepting me, then I am being arrogant. There are many other factors which influence my future. For example, your parents primarily, your partner, husband, wife, government policies, economy of your country, economy of some other country. Today the world is so intertwined that everything can influence everything. And therefore I may not get whatever result I am expecting from my action. I may be successful, which is good. I may fail. I may be moderately successful, less successful than I thought I would be. So the results could be favorable to me, could be unfavorable to me, and could be mixed. Preparing my mind for accepting the results irrespective of how they turn out to be is the way that I should receive the blessing of the Lord. So I should consider the results as a blessing of the Lord, because I have given all my action as an offering. So when in a puja you give fruits as an offering, What you get back is the prasad, and therefore whatever actions I have given, the fruits of those actions are received by me as a prasad, as the grace of the Lord. And because of that, I receive it with humility, without resentment, and knowing that whatever He has given me, even though it may not be what I wanted, is exactly what I need. The fourth one is nirmoha. I should make sure that I don't claim total responsibility for my success. Mamakara is saying that this is mine, this is mine, this is mine. And here he is saying don't have that. Nirmama. Don't claim that. Don't ever claim total responsibility for your success. And as we said earlier, there are many factors. So we can call it luck, we can call it grace, we can call it daivyam. So I am responsible for my success, definitely. But I should know that I alone am not responsible for my success. So humility in success and acceptance in failure, this is the trademark of a karma yogi. Then the fifth one and the last one is vigata jaraha, avoidance of mental fever, not getting upset at the results of my actions. Whatever actions I get, I receive, I do, I have a certain fruit of that action coming, karma phalam as it is called. Whatever karma phalam I get, I accept it with equanimity. This is samatvam, equanimity. So Krishna points out here that if you follow these principles of karma yoga, you will definitely get spiritual success. And whoever does not follow these principles is very unlikely to be successful on the spiritual path. So spiritual success is guaranteed. We are not saying that material success is not guaranteed. You may be materially successful also, because when you are offering your actions to the Lord, you will be doing those actions to the best of your ability. There is nothing better that you can do. And if that ability is there in you and you do it to your 100% capacity, then materialistic gain also is very much possible. But materialistic gain is not the primary goal of a karma yogi. The primary goal is that maturity of mind which I call chitta shuddhi, the freedom from likes and dislikes. That is the primary goal of a karma yogi. And once he achieves that, he considers himself successful whether or not he has material success in his life. Then Krishna says, talking to Arjuna, that likes and dislikes are bound to exist. Because you have a mind, likes and dislikes are bound to exist. And these likes and dislikes will be in regard to all sort of objects. So Vedanta tells us that the existence of likes and dislikes is never a problem. Because everybody has a mind, everybody will definitely have likes and dislikes. And having something which I dislike or having something which I like is never a problem. The problem is that I fail to recognize that likes and dislikes need not dictate the course of my actions. I fail to recognize that I can use my free will to act in a manner contrary to that dictated by my likes and dislikes. So he says, Krishna says, one should not fall under the influence of your likes and dislikes, because they are your greatest enemies. How will I understand this? The arrival of thoughts is usually not in our control. The initial arrival of any thought is not in my control, because it is based upon the nature with which I am born or which I have today. But whether those thoughts which I get, uninvited thoughts, should be allowed to continue is within my control. So arrival of thoughts, they are uninvited, not in my control. But whether I should nourish that thought is very much in my control. And therefore, should I nourish the thought or should I divert my attention to some other type of thought? That is a action arising out of my free will. So the perpetuation of any thought is definitely in my hand, and therefore I should use my free will to decide whether any particular thought is encouraged or to be discouraged. This is the basics which is told to Arjuna, that there is no necessity for you to act in accordance with your likes and dislikes. Krishna recognizes that Arjuna he likes people in the opposite army, that is his Dronacharya, who is his own guru, and Bhishma, who is a grandsire. Naturally, attachment is there, he likes them. And therefore, he doesn't want to fight. This is what Krishna is saying, that you may not want to fight, but that want or not wanting to fight is arising out of your likes and dislikes, out of your attachments. And as a warrior, you are not to be guided by your attachments. You have to fight against whoever is standing opposite you in the other army. So, use that free will of yours and act in a manner which is right, which need not be in harmony with your thoughts. It need not be in harmony with your likes and dislikes, but it has to be in harmony with Dharma. That is the text conveyed by Krishna. Having understood this, Arjuna says, "Hey Krishna, how come that a lot of people are aware of all this, are aware of the benefits of following Karma Yoga, and yet they do not follow Karma Yoga?" So Krishna says, very simple, it is because they are under the influence of desires and anger, otherwise known as likes and dislikes. So he says, because of Raga Dvesha, because of the likes and dislikes which overwhelm you, you don't want to follow Karma Yoga. Because Karma Yoga involves putting your likes and dislikes aside and doing what is necessary to be done. And there's a very beautiful verse where Krishna describes how this likes and dislikes function. So he says, Dhumen avritye he vahannihi yatha darsho malena cha yathol bena vrato garbha tatha tene idam avritam. He says, tene idam avritam. Because tena, that desire, has the effect of avritam, covering your intellect, you are unable to use your powers of discrimination. And he gives 3 examples. He says, Dhumen avriyate vahannihi, just as a fire is enveloped by smoke. So the fire is bright, it can be seen, but its power of illumination is covered and is not functional when the smoke is there. So here the intellect is being compared to the fire and the desire is being compared to the smoke. And Krishna is saying there are times, when the intellect is dull because of this smoke-like desire, and therefore intellect cannot do the job which it is supposed to do. He gives another example. Yatha adarshaha malenacha. Just as the mirror is covered by dust. So when the mirror is covered by dust, the mirror cannot do what it is supposed to do, which is to show my face. And what should I do? I have to take a wet cloth and rub the mirror. So here mirror is the intellect and dust is the desire. And he gives a third example. Yatha garbha ulbena avrataha. Just as a child is covered by the womb, and when the child is in the womb, it cannot do anything until it comes out. So 3 examples have been given. Covered by smoke, fire cannot do what it is supposed to do. Covered by dust, mirror cannot do what it is supposed to do. Covered by the womb, a child is unable to do anything. These are 3 examples that he has given. So he says, in the same way, covered by desire, the intellect cannot do what it is supposed to do. 3 beautiful examples. Now the question arises, why three? So fire and smoke. Here we say, how does one get rid of the smoke? You simply blow it away. You take a fan and do that, and the smoke goes away. So effort is not much. So here this is taken as mild desire. For mild desire can be addressed simply by enough intellectual practice. Thinking about it, analyzing it is sufficient to handle mild desire. Then mirror and dust. So take the dust off, you require slightly more work, right? You have to take a piece of cloth, dip it in the water and rub. So a little bit more work is required. So here this is desire which is a bit stronger, and therefore this desire, even though you know intellectually that desire is bad for you, this desire is not going to go away, and therefore I have to actually go through the experience, fulfill all those desires, and slowly understand that by fulfilling desires, desires are not going to go away. So this is the second type. The desire is slightly stronger than the first type. And the third one, of course, is if the desire is so intense, there is no point in advising, because nothing can be done, just like nothing can be done about the baby unless it is born, unless it comes out of the mother's body. This person also has to be allowed to remain as he is, in the hope that one day he will mature. So these three types of desires he has talked about. So having told us this nature of desire, and he has called desire as the enemy. He says desire is the primary enemy, kama is the primary enemy for the sadhaka, for the spiritual seeker. And he explains further. He says, I have pointed out the enemy, and if I need to fight enemy, I must know how it operates. Therefore he says, Indriyani mano buddhi asyadhishthanam uchyate aite vimohayat yeshaha jnanam avritya dehinam. So he says this desire, it operates from three base camps. One is Indriyani, the five sense organs. This is the first camp, because these five sense organs alone introduce sense objects to me in the form of touch, sound, form, color, taste and smell. So this is the origin, the introduction of objects to the sense organs. So that is the first base camp of the enemy. Now these objects may come and objects may go, but once objects have come, what happens? Manaha, the mind takes over. So even if the object has gone away, the mind has now got the impression of the object. The sense organs have done their first job. They have introduced the objects to us through the sense organs, and now the sense organs hand over the baton to the mind. Like in a relay race, you hand the baton to the next person. So sense organs hand over the baton to the mind, and the mind says, I will take care of the rest. How? By constantly dwelling on that object. I want. That attachment is building up. Then he says the third is buddhi, the intellect. The intellect is the third base camp. And how does the intellect contribute to this mess? Through a wrong judgment. What is the wrong judgment? It looks at the object which the mind is dwelling on, and because the intense desire of the mind, the intellect is not able to do its role. Right? So we saw in the last verse that the intellect, when it is covered up by desire, it cannot function in the way which it is supposed to function, and therefore the intellect cannot carry out its role. And therefore what it does, it makes a wrong judgment. It says this external object will make my life happier and more secure. This is the wrong judgment, and this is probably the worst judgment I can ever make in my life. And therefore Krishna says, with the help of these three, the sense organs, the mind and the intellect also, asya adhishthanam uchyate. This is the base camp. This is the place where the kama, the desires reside. And from here, supporting this, from supporting areas which is the sense organs and the mind and the intellect, these are the nourishing centers. From here, they infiltrate into us and they overpower the intelligent human being. How? Dehinam jnanam avritya. What is the net effect? The desires sitting in various parts of the body cover up the discriminative power. The intellect cannot function anymore. And because of that, you do exactly what your desires want you to do. You are not able to exercise your free will against the natural order of the desire. How do I, address this? So Krishna suggests certain disciplines. He says Dhamma. So the first is it's called watching the sense organs. So Indriya Nigraha, control over the sense organs. I must tell myself that this mind of mine is not a garbage disposal unit. I will decide what comes in and what does not come in. Everything cannot come in, right? Dhamma. So what is not good, I do not let it enter my mind at all. Physically, I can choose to remove myself from these objects, and therefore Dhamma. Now what about the next one is Sama. Any thoughts which I have about the objects which I have seen, these thoughts are processed, and after processing they turn into words, and then they turn into actions, and then they turn into my own character, and then they affect my destiny. Therefore this processing is very important, and I do not want unhealthy thoughts to be processed by me. So this mental alertness, where I decide what thoughts I will have, what thoughts I will not nourish. As we said earlier, thoughts, the initial thoughts we don't have too much control over, but the value, the trick lies in analyzing what is coming in and deciding what thoughts I am going to allow. A so-called entry pass. Nowadays e-pass is very famous in India, right? Anywhere you want to go, you need an e-pass. And similarly, I must give an e-pass to those thoughts which I am going to entertain and reject the others. So Dhamma and Sama. And the third is Viveka, the understanding between what is finite and between what is infinite. Understanding that the only infinite being is my own self. Everything outside is finite, apurnam. I am the only purna being, I am the only complete being. Everything outside is infinite. Now remember, this is all not the final solution. Why? Because it is all rooted in the finite. And therefore, this is like, applying a pressure on a bleeding vein to stop the flow of blood before I get the patient to a doctor. So if somebody gets hurt on the road, the first thing we say, let us stop the blood. And then once the blood flow is stopped, once the wound starts and the wound is no longer bleeding heavily, then I have enough time to take him to the doctor and give him good treatment. So all this Dhamma, Sama, Viveka, all initially is your emergency treatment. You do that. What is the long run treatment? The treatment in the long run lies only in the scriptures, lies in the knowledge, in the scriptural knowledge. Understanding that all desires are an expression of what we call apurnatvam, of the misunderstanding that I am an incomplete being. And because I think I am an incomplete being, I am constantly trying to acquire things to become complete. So whenever I want things, I should understand that I am doing it because I think that without that particular object, I am incomplete. And therefore Shastra tells us that expression of this feeling of apurnatvam, this feeling of incompleteness, The external expression of that is desire. You want things and you want things and you want things because you think by getting more things you are going to become complete. Shastra says that is wrong because you are not incomplete. You are forever, you have always been complete. So when I am complete, I am happy with whatever I have. Whatever I possess, I enjoy. Whatever is in front of me, given to me as a gift, I enjoy. But when it is not there, I do not miss it. So when desires become a necessity, then the non-fulfillment of those desires causes agitation in my mind. But when desires are a luxury, I will enjoy them. And the day that the object of desire is not around, I will no longer miss them. So it's not that I should not enjoy myself. Whatever is there which I can enjoy, I will enjoy. But the caveat is that when they are no longer there, I should not be missing them. And therefore, if you look at things, when things around you become necessities for you, they are the cause of your bondage. But when you are okay, even if they are not around you, then you can enjoy them when they are around you. So that's called a luxury. I can enjoy my luxuries, but I should ensure that my luxuries do not become bondage. So this process whereby which I convert all necessities into luxuries, this is called moksha. The presence of my body is a luxury, that I've got eyes is a luxury, that I've got hands and legs is a luxury, that there is still hair on my head is a luxury. This orientation is possible only through self-knowledge, only through Atmajnanam. And Krishna therefore ends this chapter by saying that Atmajnanam is the ultimate remedy for the problems of all binding desires. And this Atmajnanam is nothing but moksha, which we call otherwise liberation. So with this we'll stop. Thank you for your patience. Om Purnamadav Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnam Eva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Bolo Sadguru Shivanand Maharaj ki Jai. Om Bolo Swami Vishnu Devanand Maharaj ki Jai. Om Tat Sat. Om Namah Shivaya. Thank you for your patience. See you next week.